Welcome, everyone. I'd like to thank those of you who are here in person and also welcome those of you who are joining us virtually right now. My name is Naomi Kohler, and I serve as the director of the Simon Scott Center for the Prevention of Genocide at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. Our center exists to try to do today for communities at risk what was not done for the Jews of Europe. We are deeply honored to be able to welcome you alongside the Global Justice Center and the Canadian Mission to the UN in hosting this timely event. We're very grateful to the Canadian government's continued leadership on advancing justice in Myanmar. We're gathered here to talk about how to advance justice and accountability, not in the aftermath of conflict and atrocities, but in a situation where they remain ongoing. Many of our colleagues that will join us in the conversation today have been part of the effort to draw attention to the risks that their communities faced, to the crimes that their communities experienced, and to the ongoing threats that their families face on a daily basis. Each of them face one common perpetrator in those crimes, the military, the Tatmadaw, who've been able to thrive in the culture of impunity that has prevailed within the country. We've seen genocide and crimes against humanity committed against the Rohingya community. We've seen crimes against humanity committed against other ethnic minorities in the country. A deeply ingrained culture of impunity and exacerbated atrocity risks since the coup and the violent crackdowns on civilians that are occurring currently. At the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, we have worked for over the past decade to report on the early warning signs of possible genocide, documented the ongoing mass atrocities, made our own finding of genocide in the context of the Rohingya. We've been releasing a series of reports that look at the genocide prevention component of the Genocide Convention. And we've built an exhibit called Burma's Path to Genocide, all with the goal of helping alongside each of you to prevent, to protect, and to in some small way, help restore the dignity of those who've lost so much, as well as to help set a historical record to aid in transitional justice. But also today, we're going to be talking about a broader sense of justice as well. Over the past several years, there have been significant advances. There's been the establishment of a fact-finding mission, an independent investigative mechanism for Myanmar. We've seen cases brought forward at the International Court of Justice. We've seen a case come forward now in Argentina through universal jurisdiction, an ICC investigation, and most recently, on that note, the expression of support from the US government for the ICC referral. We've also seen recently the United Kingdom express their intent to intervene in the ICJ case, which we welcome. Civil society leaders, including those present with us today, have been leading the charge for justice and accountability for decades for atrocity crimes. They can't do it alone. They require support from states worldwide to strengthen norms regarding atrocity prevention, effective response, and genuine accountability. Accountability mechanisms all too often are not designed around the needs of victims and survivors. That's why it's so important that we're joined here today by civil society leaders who've been pressing for meaningful justice for their groups and who for far too many years have experienced mass atrocities in Burma. It's my deep honor to introduce Ambassador Bob Ray, the permanent representative of Canada to the United Nations in New York, and a longtime champion of human rights and justice and accountability in Myanmar, to deliver opening remarks.
Well, thank you very much, Naomi, for doing what you do and for carrying on with such courage and such determination. Naomi mentioned the experience that the world had in the years leading up to World War II. And like many of you, I've been watching the Ken Burns documentary on the United States and the Holocaust, but really it's about not just the US and the Holocaust, but it's about how the rest of the world watched on. And in the course of watching that, I've been reflecting, and I think Naomi is referring to it as well. I just want to emphasize a couple of things. The first one is that the world in which we're in which we're watching and dealing with this terrible situation in Myanmar as we are in many other areas of conflict and zones of conflict around the world, we're living in a time when information is moving much more quickly in a much more open and dramatic way. So that's one thing that's changed. The other thing that's really changed, I think, and we need to keep on encouraging that change, is the way in which it's no longer the world of officials that decides how things work. It's the world in which civil society is fully and completely engaged. This is a transformation of the way in which we do business, the way we work, how we affect change and affect life. And as somebody who's come into the world of diplomacy from whatever other world I was in, sometimes I wonder what it was exactly, but certainly the world of politics. I keep encouraging my diplomatic colleagues to understand this is the way it is. This is how we do things now. And so the source of information that is provided by civil society is not just something that happens on the margins or something that we do occasionally. It's at the center of our work. And I have to say to the panelists, some of whom Yasmin and Akhil I know very, very well, I don't come here in a spirit of defensiveness saying, governments are doing all they can and please go away because we're doing enough. It's more in a sense of saying, yes, let's talk about the challenges that we all face. It's a very difficult situation for us to make the progress that we all want to make. It's extremely frustrating. I had a meeting yesterday with a group of women from Afghanistan who were holding a meeting in Ottawa, and I was meeting with them online. And there was just a lot of anger and frustration in the room. And for some people, that's a cause of tremendous defensiveness. You say, well, no, you don't understand. We've been doing all this work, and don't you understand how much work we've been doing? That's never the right answer. Never the right answer. The right answer is we can always do more. Let's listen and let's learn from each other as to what needs to be done. I, as you know, served for 5 years, or since the 5 years ago, I was appointed as the special envoy for Canada on Myanmar. I was asked by the Prime Minister to do it shortly after the forcible deportation of close to 1 million people in the fall of 2017. And as I was saying to Yasmin, because I met Yasmin at a meeting in the very early days of my appointment, and I said to her, look, you have to understand something, that I am now as deeply implicated in this situation as anyone, emotionally and intellectually and engaged as much as we can be in trying to find a solution. Just a few weeks ago, I joined a virtual event with the young Rohingya leader, Wei Nu, who called on all of us to continue to maintain attention and to focus and to continue focus. And this is other point I want to make is, I know it's frustrating sometimes for people to hear us talking about other issues. But don't think that because we, from time to time, have to focus on other issues, it means we're less focused or we're not paying attention to what's happening in Myanmar. I think that's a very natural temptation for people who are in the middle of disputes to feel that no one's paying enough attention to what's going on in our situation. It's a very human reaction. And I want to just say that I think we have to learn in our society today how to live with and deal with and fight the good fight against a number of conflicts. And it's important for us to be able to talk honestly about how challenging that can be. We're very pleased to partner with the Global Justice Center and the Simon Scott Center for the Prevention of Genocide. I have to say both organizations have played a tremendously positive role in bringing public attention to not only the challenges we're facing in Myanmar, but around our world. And I think I can say that from our own mission in Yangon, from all the reports that we're seeing on social media and in traditional media, the situation is terrible. Inside Myanmar, it's terrible. Women and children are being killed. It's a civil war. People say to me, we have to do everything we can to prevent a civil war. I said, what are you talking about? It's already happening. It's there. It's the nature of the conflict that's there. the one thing I would stress, not to kind of try to make a point, but it's to say that when you consider what was set out in 2017 as what we needed to do, it's actually the case that we have been doing a lot of the things we said we needed to do more effectively. So on the issue of accountability, for example, we have set up the mechanism. We have used the ICJ. We have used the issue of forcible deportation as an opportunity to engage. We now have the engagement of the ICC. What that will bring, we don't know. It's very frustrating. You say, yeah, we need to do, what more can we do? The answer is we always have to figure out how to do more. Canada and the Netherlands have agreed to engage on the issue of particularly sexual violence as a tool of crimes against humanity. And we will continue to do that. And we're delighted that other countries are joining with us. The UK just announced recently that they would do so. And we have other countries that are coming on board, and that's extremely, extremely important. We have, as a government, announced the second phase of our response. The first phase was the response that was announced by Canada after I gave my report. And that was to fund close to $300 million a year. That's now been renewed again for another 3 years. So we are again looking at this as an issue that has to be dealt with in a variety of ways. We've also imposed targeted sanctions against individuals and entities associated with the military regime, 5 of which have been brought in since the coup. And we're always looking at what else can we do together to be even more effective. As we all know, we have not yet brought an end to the genocide and to the conflict internally inside Myanmar, which has been so devastating. And I know that ultimately, the extent to which we're successful is not about simply rhyming off all the things that we've done, what we're trying to do. It's about actually succeeding. And I think we need to understand that has to be the focus of our attention, is ending the regime of the Tatmadaw, ending the dictatorship of the Tatmadaw, moving to elections, moving to a democratic government, moving to a government that reflects the whole of the country, including the Rohingya people, making sure the Rohingya people are included in the new Burma, in the new Myanmar, and giving the opportunity for people to return from the camps in Bangladesh. All of those things need to happen. We're not there yet, far from it. We're in the middle of a terrible struggle. But as once was said, is when you find yourself in the middle of hell, what do? The answer is you keep going. And so we have to keep going. And the way we keep going most effectively, so I will close where I started, is really for us to work together, for us to embrace all of the knowledge, all of the information, all of the activism that we can find, and really work with it to get to a better and stronger place, and to see us work through to success. And that's what Canada is committed to doing. And I'm delighted that we've been able to co-sponsor this event, and that I hope many people are joining us online and elsewhere, and look forward very much to hearing from the panel today. So now I'll turn it back to Naomi. Watch your step here.
Thank you, Ambassador Ray, for those incredibly powerful words and call to action on the need for there to be a consistent, coordinated, and calibrated response. We're engaged in this in the long term. I think, drawing again on the lessons of the Holocaust, there are still cases today that are being brought forward against perpetrators 80 years later. And I think that shows just how incredibly committed victims and survivors are to seeing justice, and also what enduring support from government and others can look like. And that's what we need to ensure that we're able to maintain today. It is now my deep honor to introduce Ambassador Lisa Carty, the United States representative to the UN Economic and Social Council, and the alternative representative of the United States to the UN General Assembly. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much. It really is an honor to be here with you today. And I just have to start out by thanking Ambassador Ray for the really important points that you brought us to right at the start, which is that we need to be focused on success, but we need to be working much more broadly than just the way maybe governments have traditionally worked, and that civil society is absolutely our indisputable partner in this situation and so many other situations that are equally complicated that you alluded to, where we need to just keep going in the face of tremendous obstacles. And that role of civil society here, I think at the UN it's especially important. And it's something we need to always keep a focus on, is how we bring those voices, make them ever more present here. It is such an honor to also be here with our panelists. And I know there are other activists listening and possibly in the room today. Thank you for your courage. I had the opportunity, it was a number of years ago before the Tatmadaw regime, to actually visit Burma and to spend time with a lot of the women's leadership groups, including out in the rural areas. And that visit has really stayed with me because of the resilience and the perseverance that I saw in those communities who had already endured so much. So your voices are more important than ever. Last month, we commemorated the 5th anniversary of the horrific 2017 campaign against the Rohingya, during which members of the Burmese military committed genocide and crimes against humanity. Many of these same military forces have participated in the coup and continue to repress, physically abuse, and kill the people of Burma in a blatant attempt to extinguish Burma's democratic future. As recently as September 16th, Burmese armed forces attacked a school in Yedkon, killing at least 11 children and 2 adults. Since the February 2021 military coup, approximately 380 children have lost their lives. The regime's execution of pro-democracy and opposition leaders in July is another example of the military's abject disregard for the lives of the Burmese people. Its violence has exacerbated the worsening humanitarian situation, particularly for ethnic and religious minority communities, including Rohingya, who continue to remain among the most vulnerable and marginalized populations in the country. We are deeply troubled by the ongoing reports of human rights abuses, including the increase in gender-based violence. Women and girls in areas where fighting is ongoing are particularly vulnerable to sexual violence, arbitrary detention, and forced labor. The United States remains committed to advancing justice and accountability for all people in Burma and stands in solidarity with the victims and the survivors. Since 2017, the United States has supported Rohingya, recognizing that they cannot safely return to their homeland of Burma under current conditions. We've provided more than $1.7 billion to assist those affected by the crises in Burma, in Bangladesh, and elsewhere in the region, remaining the leading donor of humanitarian assistance. Last week, we were proud to announce $170 million in additional assistance to support the expansion of the Myanmar curriculum, a major milestone towards offering all Rohingya children in Bangladesh an opportunity for a formal education. With the government of Bangladesh's endorsement of the UN Skills Development Framework, we look forward to supporting more livelihood and vocational training opportunities for Rohingya within the refugee camps. Let me also highlight the concrete actions the United States has taken to ensure we address accountability and justice. The United States has taken steps to support the case the Gambia has brought the International Court of Justice, asserting that Burma violated its obligations under the Genocide Convention. We provide support to the UN's independent investigative mechanism for Myanmar, which has mandated to collect, consolidate, preserve, and analyze evidence of the most serious crimes and violations of international law committed in Burma since 2011. The United States works with international partners and NGOs to support brave Rohingya seeking justice in the courts of Argentina for the atrocities committed against them. And we are working with the Rohingya community more broadly to help document atrocities and abuses. We stand ready to support a transitional justice process that respects victims' demands for truth, reparation, justice, and non-recurrence once that becomes viable. Finally, Secretary Blinken has made clear that the United States supports measures by the UN Security Council to promote justice and accountability for the military's actions, and would support a UN Security Council referral of the situation in Burma to the International Criminal Court. We want to be clear about the United States' position on the need for accountability for victims of the Burmese military's atrocities. We are open to all available options to help ensure there is justice. Preventing the reoccurrence of atrocities, addressing the needs of victims, and ensuring that those responsible are held accountable are essential to address the military's continued impunity and to ensure a peaceful, prosperous, and democratic Burma that respects the human rights of all. Justice may still feel like it is a long way off. Justice for these types of atrocities can take decades, but it can only happen through the efforts of victims, survivors, their advocates, and allies, laying the foundation year after year. The United States will keep working alongside you towards this end. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Ambassador Carty, for that incredibly comprehensive overview of just how committed the US government has been to the pursuit of accountability. I think it's also worth noting that the US government, along with other governments, including Canada and the UK, undertook an incredibly important documentation effort to ensure that the information was sought out and that survivors who were in the camps in Bangladesh were able to have their voices heard, which informed not just the US government's determination and genocide finding, but also has laid the framework and the foundation for future other avenues of justice to be pursued, which is such an importantly critical step to be taking. That leads very kind of swiftly into introducing Nick Kumajan, the head of the Independent Investigative Mechanism for Myanmar, who's going to deliver virtually opening remarks. He is unable to join us in person, but we're very grateful for his video contributions. Thank you.
It is an honor to be invited here at this important event, and I want to thank the Global Justice Center, the U.S. Holocaust Museum, and the Permanent Mission of Canada to the United Nations for hosting this event and for inviting me, and not only for their work on this event, but all of three of these organizations have made such significant contributions to keeping this issue of the plight of the Rohingya up to date and in the public eye. And this is very, very important. Of course, now it's been a little over 5 years since the clearance operations that led to the majority of Rohingya being forced to leave Myanmar took place. But it's not 5 years since the crimes ended. It's 5 years that the crime continues, because every day that the Rohingya are away from their homes and out of their communities, they continue to suffer. I've been to the camps twice in Cox's Bazar, and I hear that message consistently from all the Rohingya I speak to. They want to go home. When can they go home? What can we do to help them go home? And we hope to make our own contribution by contributing when I say us, the Independent Investigative Mechanism for Myanmar, contributing to the end of this cycle of impunity for the lack of accountability. We want there to be accountability for crimes that led to the current plight of such a huge population. And to do that, we need the assistance and support of all of you. So I'm very happy to be here and to address you on this. And also, we all know that there's this important case going on at the International Court of Justice. This case is very important because a community that is taken away from its land will often miss what it is that binds the members of the community together. A community that's scattered around the world will no longer eventually exist as a community. So it's very important that people be able to go home, to be in their homes. And this case at the International Court of Justice will be very important. We believe it's very important that the judges of that case have the best evidence of what actually happened. That case is proceeding now at a pretty rapid speed, and they are now reaching the stage where the judges will be taking evidence. The parties have to list their evidence in their written submissions that are due in next year. So we feel the pressure of time to contribute what we can to the judges having the best evidence in that case. And I know that all of you will support these efforts and all efforts to see that the plight of the Rohingya is not forgotten, and that international law and international justice make our contribution to resolving the horrendous state that they're currently in. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nick, and thank you to you and your team for the remarkable work that you're doing. It's now my honor to introduce our esteemed panelists. Na Sursur, the General Secretary of the Women's League of Burma. I invite you to come up. Yasmin Ullah, Rohingya human rights activist, feminist, and poet. And Akila Radhakrishnan, the President of the Global Justice Center. Thank you, ladies. It's a real pleasure to be able to be here with you. One quick housekeeping note, due to my phone's desire to speak, I have left it at its seat. So I will be using my watch, and we'll just flag. We have about 30 minutes for what I know will be a very important and compelling conversation. One of the challenges that we often talk about at the Holocaust Museum is how often the burden of advocating for action falls on the shoulders of civil society and falls on the shoulders of those who have borne the worst and the brunt of the very crimes that we're talking about. And so I do want to very much acknowledge, especially Na Sursur and Yasmin, your participation, because I know how difficult it can be to feel the burden and the weight of your community as you speak. And so it is really a privilege to be here and to recognize also just how incredibly difficult and traumatic this entire endeavor and having to advocate for your communities is. We very much hope that in some small way this does, as we said before, help to move the conversation forward and also help restore the dignity to your communities. Yasmin, I wanted to start with you. We've already heard in the interventions thus far about the advances that have been made in various forms of justice. And I know that for you and your community, the conception of justice is much broader. When I was in Bangladesh, when people said we seek justice, they talked about the ability to return home. They talked about citizenship. They talked about ensuring that their language can continue, that their children, as you noted, could be educated. But they also talked about formal criminal justice as well. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about some of the challenges that you have faced as a Rohingya advocate in advancing those calls for action.
Thank you, Naomi. And I would like to first thank the mission ambassadors and the Global Justice Center and the Scott Simon Center for inviting me today. And I think that when it comes to the challenges, there's one particular story about my colleague wanting to commemorate the genocide commemoration day on every August 25th. And this one particular year, I believe it was last year, 2021, we were really scared that people in the camps will actually not be able to host rallies, not be able to do much without surveillance, without Bangladeshi government potentially targeting them. And unfortunately, my colleagues had to find ways to actually make things work, to express themselves regardless of the harms that may come to them. My colleagues, unfortunately, were picked up by the special branch police for a day. So on August 25th, he was completely missing. And because of his stature, I think, or the caliber of work that he's done with, advancing, excuse me, the work within the camps, advocacy, and basically just working with international community to ensure that people hear what's happening. And what happened was, though he was, he was actually picked up and taken in custody for a while, he was still able to actually put up bamboo sticks in a piece of land that was empty in the camps, and basically put up mask on each of the pole. And then in the middle, he posted the basically the writing that says no consultation, no solution. And that was in place of everyone that could have been there. So my biggest challenge and the biggest challenge that faced our community to this day is the exclusionary policy and practices that expand far, far beyond, what we can truly conceptualize. Oftentimes we think that just talking to Rohingya or just, allowing them to be at the table is enough, or presenting to them the solutions is enough. I want to, ensure that you understand the survival that we've been able to live to this day, take ourselves outside of the country to ensure that we're no longer in harm's way, trying to ensure that our families are fed, even though we're given so little in the camps or elsewhere in the region. All of these things require a skill set. And it's not that we're victim helpless people. We've not actually, as much as there's narratives out there that Rohingya are just, this very poor, desperate, desolate people that we need saving. Instead of that, how about we flip and rethink our approach to how to, to how to find solution by actually centering what they can already do to ensure that we can, support them and not necessarily have to always be here to handle and hold them all these time. And I'm grateful that the Canadian government is actually committed for another 3 years in terms of funding. But how about we actually focus the funding to ensure that people are capable of producing their food inside the camps, so that the Canadian government or other, UN member states would not have to actually produce food for us or ensure that food distributions are there. Because from 2020 April on to this year to right now, food distribution issue has been desperate within the camps. There are families that have not been able to actually get fed for the last 2 years. Imagine having to eat rice and lentil every day, and just think how that would affect your health, your gut, your psyche. All of this matters. And so I hope that, in terms of when we rethink how to include Rohingya, how to consult with them, we actually hinge on the idea that they can already save themselves. We just need to do better in terms of listening. We just need to do better in terms of centering their approach in how they would like to be helped, so that you don't have to help us in the long run, so that we can actually sustain ourselves. And that skills just require a lot more, observation, a lot more collaboration. And it cannot be top down, unfortunately, as much as this is very much a trend within the international affairs. So what I would like to end with is this. The idea that Rohingya, can save themselves, can do a lot more work to ensure that they can live within the camps, although there's issues with the Bangladeshi Authority not wanting us to be there and constantly bringing up repatriation. There is a way to try to push Bangladeshi government to understand that we would not be able to go back, because even the first tenets of the safe return is not met, which is safety. Unfortunately, before I end, right now there is an issue within my own hometown where the junta is fighting with the Arakan army, and they decide to use the strategic location, which is our villages, to be the middle ground where they constantly bombing each other and throw weapons. So speaking to you here, while my family are not safe is a burden that I'm willing to carry, but I don't know how long we can carry this, how long we can keep advocating for ourselves without all these different, basic structures or basic necessities met. How long would people in the camps be able to advocate for themselves if they're not able to actually realize their own will, produce their own food, make sure that their labor is counting for something, make sure that their children can educate themselves in order to actually look forward to something in the future, that there is something for them in life. There's this normalization of the struggle for the Rohingya that we just expect the Rohingya should struggle, expect the Rohingya should suffer, expect that starvation, of course, starvation is going to be an issue within the camps. Of course, education will be something that you constantly talk about. So all of these aspects would require a lot more inclusion, and inclusion from the very top level, right down to the civil society groups. Every single time you discuss about Myanmar, please do not exclude Rohingya. The matters about Myanmar includes Rohingya. We live there. We continue to live there to this day. And so I'd like to end with that, and I welcome any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Yasmin. Every time you speak, I'm always struck by the fact that part of the responsibility that we bear is also to reframe the way we have the conversation. And for many of us who've worked on Burma for quite a long time, if you remember, 2008 and around that time, the description that the UN system used all the time was most marginalized community on earth, most neglected, most oppressed. And when we, think about this concept of being forgotten, the forgotten people, we also take away a large degree of agency. And I think if we reframe to say some of the most resilient people on earth, there are people in the camps that have been there since 1992, seeking and desiring the ability to return home. But as you say, to return home what? To face the risk of genocide again? Because the situation has not changed. There has not been any restoration of citizenship. There has not been any changes in legal access that you have, or in the rights that are afforded to the Rohingya community. I was wondering if you could just speak briefly to, if you were to take a victim-centered approach and reflect on the Rohingya community's perspectives. I know you'll speak to a subset, obviously, because the community is quite large. Views towards the international accountability efforts that have been taken so far, including the ICJ case. What would it mean to integrate kind of a victim-centered approach there, and what are the perspectives and thoughts?
I believe that my community is incredibly grateful in terms of the progress that we've made, and that thankfully, unfortunately too, comes from a lot of labor that a lot of our women, a lot of people who've been victimized have to carry in terms of telling their stories, living through re-traumatization over and over to ensure that these things are documented. I would like, and I hope that this would be an approach that we would shift towards, is restorative justice. I believe that it's important to hold perpetrators accountable, and it's important that UN member states actually engage in divestment to ensure that none of our money actually goes to support and buy weapons for further war crimes and genocide and crimes against humanity within the country, so that the military cannot actually be empowered, and that's one of the ways that we disempower the perpetrators. But a very important aspect of a victim-centered approach is to ensure that there is rehabilitation. And rehabilitation, as I have mentioned, is to ensure that at the very least, the basic needs, food, water, education, things like healthcare, all of those things have to be met first before the community can even think about how they can actually rebuild. And rebuilding would mean, more than just, oh, we have a community, here's, our monthly meeting, now we're back together. There's a lot more that we've lost culturally, linguistically, historically. All of these things are actually being taken away from us. There's a lot of historical revisionism involved within a lot of Myanmar circles. And all of these things would involve Rohingya in the long run, needing to basically advocate for themselves, for a place to live, for a place within political, social, and economic realm within the country. Once we can eradicate the Tatmadaw So all of these things need a lot more inclusion, as I've mentioned, and it would actually require us to think a lot more and connect with the community and then work with them to ask them what they would like to do in order to rebuild, how they see the issue, how they would like to rehabilitate, how they think, you know, their future could be rebuilt. Thank you.
Thank you, Yasmin. I'm struck just by the comment you made at the beginning around victims also of sexual violence and how there is still incredible need to ensure that we are ensuring that there's consent given when people are being interviewed, that there's psychosocial support provided, that there is not over-documentation, re-traumatization, that there's coordination amongst the efforts that are being undertaken in the pursuit of kind of traditional criminal justice efforts. And that's something that unfortunately in the context of the Rohingya, the Yazidi, and likely now even today in Ukraine, we're probably seeing a lot of poor practices put in place that are going to, again, result in more victimization. So that is definitely one area. And then also, as you said, a more holistic understanding to what justice means. Nasser, sir, taking a step back and looking at the broader country today, we're seeing conflict in many parts of the country. And also with the coup, we're seeing a very brutal crackdown on civilians again. Women have been long at the forefront in Burma of raising concerns about human rights violations, engaging in documentation efforts, forming coalitions of victims and survivors, and really trying to be that kind of scream to the world to try to compel the world to act and respond. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what some of the groups that you're working with now, the challenges that they're facing, and what some of the shifts have been over the last year and a half in the wake of the coup.
Firstly, thank you so much for the organizers, Global Justice Center, and all corp museums to invite me, and also it's honor to be here. So this is my first time to have face-to-face meeting and event. We have it long, a few years to be in the online and the Zoom meeting the whole day and the whole night. So I'm really honored to be here today. I would like to introduce a little bit of Women's Legal Burma. Women's Legal Burma is compressed with the 30 ethnic women's organizations, and that we work for the justice, equality, and democracy and peace, and especially building the federal democratic unions. We have a political stand to build up the federal democratic union in Burma, because we feel that we are a diverse group and different ethnic groups in Burma to be equal and self-determination of each of the ethnic groups. And that to date, I would like to focus more on the ground situations, what the women faces, and how they face different difficulties and challenges, and how they address themselves. And that also what the priorities of the women's push for the justice, and that what we need for it. So I will focus all those things to date. And that also, I will offer more questions after my speakings as well. So women's groups are currently work under very dangerous condition, and women's human rights defenders continue to be targeted and also experience regular harassment, arrest, and murdered. And also the military junta are also aggressive investigation system, and require women's group to be extremely vigilant. So, and that also service delivery was already in state prior to the coup, and due to decade of the ethnic strips and crimes underfunded, now it has completely broken down. Humanitarian aid workers cannot access those in the greatest need, and also effort by the international and regional agencies to deliver humanitarian aid are woefully inadequate. Currently, humanitarian aid delivery efforts focus on the partnering with the military junta. So we face these courts, it's not trust to assess the funding from those engaging or have it partner with the military. And even the IDP or the people who are suffer from the fighting, themselves also, they feel like a threat and fear to assess those kind of things. And that's all of the resistance movement, include women human rights defender and all women's groups. So they are in the security risks in everywhere. Even you are not participate or involved in the resist the coup, you are also in the insecure situation, and at any time can be rape, can be face sexual violence, and can be face any violations. So we are facing right now, and that women's groups also hold expertise and experience in already doing the work, and also women who are witnesses the complete and total lack of rule of law in Burma. Military who continue to perpetrate crimes of genocide and war crimes and a crime against humanity with impunity, and that we have nowhere to report, and we have no people to ask for help. So even women's group, they have it many long years, but for now, the threats and the danger of the security and risks are taking increase and increase. So we always have to be careful, all those to take care or help the survivor and victor. And that we have very long state challenges of the judicial system, and that we can even assess the justice in anywhere. So there's a lot of cases like GBB and SGBB has increased almost every day. And that the priorities of the violations like trafficking and forced to be sex worker and then rape, child rape, and has increased. And that we just documented and reported and speak out for them to assess the international justice and accountability. And that the challenges of the women's faces to aim largely safety and security, and that also Burma who are also actively continue their impunity and arrest continue to arrest the women's and all activists and all the resistance movement and detain, torture and killed. And also the gender specific violence, also serious threat to the women human rights defenders on the ground. The nationwide post continue to women's organizes, but faces those challenges include increases systematic investigations by the military Hotam, and that also even the resisting groups like CRPH and other resistance movements abolish the 2008 constitution, but the military still uses that, and they try to figure it out and engage with the other like ethnic armed groups or party to be legitimate them. So, and they use them as a platform and they use them as an image to restore their legitimacy. So this is the way that they use under the 2008 constitution. In the 2008 constitution also, we have mentioned a lot that the crimes that the military Hotan committed in the constitution grant them to let them to have impunity, let them to be in impunity. And so this is also, we always fight off and try to, restore democratic systems in Burma. And that what we are pushing for the justice. So basically we hope international justice and accountability, and also we cooperate together with women's groups, other women's groups, and the resistance movement to bring and to push the international community to take strong action. Even we have advocate and pushing many long years, but we still don't see any strong action. The only thing in Burma, people, especially women who basically face atrocity of the violation, rape or sexual. So when we hear their voice, they said they want the accountability and they want the justice. So this is the only that we see is the military junta committed the international law, international crime. So it's need to take it by the international community. So this is what we always bring the voice from the ground, and even we advocate on behalf of them to bring the international to refer the military junta to ICC. So this is the only way that we need urgently and seriously for the justice and accountability. And the last, Women's League of Burma, we also strong advocate for the advocacy platform of the political platform, because there's also some stakeholder that need to understand and recognize the suffering of the women's surviving. So this is we have aimed to elaborate into the voice of the ethnic women's groups, and also we also delegate in the political platform and pushing the platform in the NUCC called National Unity Consultative Council. And also we keep our commitment to continue to advocate the NUCC for inclusive and collective leadership. And also we also raised the Rohingya representative as well, but it doesn't work yet. But we're going to keep pushing to bring the Rohingya representative in the political platform, because we want the women's perspective to be reflected even in the charter or even in the decision-making level. So lastly, we Women's League of Burma has support many different survivors groups that suffer from the conflict and from the resistant activities. So we support CDM, Civilian Disobedient Movement, because most of them are women, and also includes pregnant women and new baby man. So they are facing many challenges and different challenges because they run and they refuse some in the EAO control area, ethnic armed groups are control areas that, and also their needs are also different with the other people. So we need to specify of their needs and support them. And that we support more than 1,660 people of the CDM. And also we support 1,184 women's human rights defender who are faces security risks and need to relocate and need to move around for their security. So all those are also have to bring their children. Some of the mother, some of the women human rights defender are pregnant, and also some of their mother need to bring 2-3 children with them. So when we think about all those support, we need to support those children as well. So these are also we handle and support as much as we can. And that also IDP, so specific focuses on the women's needs. So we support hygiene or kid or especially for the women who need different needs. So this is we are working for and support from the ground. So the last point that I would like to raise, so most of the generations that resist the military coups, they decide and they, how to say, keep their mind that this resistance, it will be the last resistance, and then they will also keep their commitment to fight until the military coup broken and the military restore the Federal Democratic Union or restore the country in the news, and that they were going to fight till the end of the resistance and to reach to our aim. So most of the generation and most of the resistance movement keep their mind of this. So that's why it's even we took already over 1 year, but we still keep our commitment, even CDM and women's groups and struggle in different groups. So they still keep their commitment. Thank you. So I'm welcome for the more questions.
Thank you, Nasser, sir. I'm really struck by a number of things that you said, but one was just the unity of purpose and the fact that women's groups are working across communities to have a common agenda and a common set of goals that you're working towards, which goes exactly against what the military has sought to do, which has been to divide. And your explicit reference also to the inclusion of the Rohingya community is noted, because that is something that has been long invoked as an example of why the Rohingya are, quote unquote, from the perspective of the government, foreign. And I think you've just articulated very powerfully that there is a common platform and also a common recognition, as we mentioned before, that there is one common perpetrator that binds all. And also just that notion you said of they're seeking legitimization. There can't be normalization with a regime that's perpetrating these types of crimes and that is imperiling communities in the way that you outlined. And I think it's worth noting, because there are a lot of businesses that are interested in engaging and re-entering within Myanmar. And I think it's worth heeding. And I think the justice efforts that are underway are a reminder to those business entities. Do you actually want to be doing business with a genocidal regime? Not only are there the ethical considerations, but there are potentially legal implications as well. And then, of course, extreme risks. So taking just kind of a pivot there, Akila, to the international accountability efforts. It's been remarkable to see the case that the Gambia, supported by Canada, and now the UK, are moving forward at the ICJ. We see the ICC referral. There's a number of different avenues that have been taken forward. And I was wondering if you could just reflect a little bit on essentially two themes that have come out of the conversation. One is the gap between the expectations of what the promise of those mechanisms can bring, and also the needs for victims and survivors. And then just kind of the general posture towards accountability for these crimes more broadly. Small question.
Thank you so much, Naomi, and thank you, Ambassador Ray, to the Mission of Canada and to the Simons Gold Center for co-convening this conversation with us. I'll start with, so our organization was actually founded after when our founder went to Burma and met the Women's League of Burma in 2005. So this is a part of our history and a part of the work that we've done now in the 15 years of our founding. And one thing that strikes me as I look back at what is it that the women's groups were calling for in 2005, in 2008, in 2012? It's what you've heard here today. There's been a consistent failure to, take into account what has been asked for and act on it. So that's a theme that I want to revisit, because what you're hearing here from Sursur, from Yasmin, from Naomi, they're not new. And so even as we see these pockets of progress in Myanmar, my call today is to think about what more is it that can be done, and how does it meaningfully center the community voices that we're hearing from. So I think on the first point on Naomi, you asked about the important progress that's been made around justice and accountability. It's been incredibly important to see how that's progressed. The ICJ case in particular, I think, was a moment where you saw a break in the longstanding impunity that has been afforded the Tatmadaw. It was the filing of the case was really a moment. I was there with Yasmin actually in The Hague when the case was filed, right? And it was a moment that not just said, to the junta, to Myanmar, we are no longer tolerating what you've been doing for so long with impunity. It also was a recognition to, Naomi, you talked about in the 80s, the description of the Rohingya as the most marginalized. It was a validation of their existence. It was a validation of their plight. And I think that was incredibly important. The same with what we're looking at around the ICC referral, the universal jurisdiction case. They're so important, and the Rohingya are no doubt leading the way forward for justice and accountability in Myanmar. But all of these cases are focused on the Rohingya. What we're seeing in Myanmar, what we've seen over decades, is a suppression of the entirety of the population, and particularly suppression of the wide array of ethnic groups in the country. And so that's one thing that I will say that there's a call for here today is as we think about these important justice initiatives, the need to continue to support them, we also need to be thinking about what is not being covered by these cases. They don't cover what's happened after the coup. They do not cover 60 years of crimes committed against a population. We still have no formal paths for justice and accountability. So one of the, so as we sit and we work on some of these more formalistic justice and accountability mechanisms, I'll kind of address the larger scope of what we're talking about. My call is to think about what it is that we can do to enable justice for the entirety of the country. Ambassador Carty importantly raised the idea of what transitional justice looks like. I think we need to look at it because a holistic response to the crimes that have been committed in the country is incredibly, incredibly important. The other thing I'll say is, we had, Nick Kumjin from the IMM. Their work has been so incredibly important in continuing to document. And while they, when they were created, had a sort of backwards looking mandate to document what happened to the Rohingya, what happened, in northern Shan and Kachin states since 2011, their mandate has rapidly expanded. And it's incredibly important. And so I was looking at their recent report to the Human Rights Council, and I think there were a couple of things in there that's worth addressing because they themselves say the justice and accountability progress towards it has been limited. So continue to resource and support them. But one call that I thought was really important in that report is they're expressing how their own work has been stymied by their lack of access to the ground, not just to Myanmar, but to other countries in the Asia Pacific region. So I think to think about how, as countries and actors in this room, we think about how if we're going to support their work and documentation, we actually utilize the diplomatic and political capital to grant them access to the places where they need to meaningfully document information. They have had the cooperation and the ability to travel to Bangladesh and do that work, but other countries where you have those now who have had to leave Myanmar in the wake of the coup, places like Thailand, they do not have access to. So I think that's another point that I would make as we think about what it is that we need to do. My second call today is really to think about, the composition of this panel is incredibly rare that we have all women sitting up here. My second call is to think about how to meaningfully center gender across all of the conversations that we're having in the context of Myanmar. Sursur, Yasmin, the other women's groups, they have long been fighting the entrenched patriarchal system that is the Tatmadaw. But it's not just the Tatmadaw. They're also fighting the entrenched patriarchy that exists within the country writ large, that says that even when women are allowed to come to the table, they're only allowed to talk about certain issues. If they're talking about justice, women are there to talk about sexual violence. If they're talking about reconciliation for the country, they're going to be talking about, what the community needs, right? And my call here is what can be done to push not just international actors, but the domestic actors who are taking political leadership, who are helping to shape, the future of the country to actually meaningfully incorporate women's voices across the board when it comes to political conversations. Sursur talked about the women's groups have an idea of what the federal charter needs to say. So that's where women need to be. And I think to me, it's incredibly important that we think about what that role is. So we're not just instrumentalizing women's voices, but that we're actually putting them and helping them step into their own power in building the future of the country. The last point I think I want to hit here is to think about what is going on more broadly in the country. You have yet again, an elite political leadership that has stepped up, and they are leading what looks like a response to the country. There are diverse feelings on what that leadership looks like. To me, I go back to where I started, which is we've been working on Myanmar since 2005. And what that means to me is that we need to think about, as an international community, not making the same mistakes that were made in 2011 and in 2012 and throughout the past decade in actually deferring to political elites in the country who have a very specific vision for what Myanmar needs to look like. And while there's incredible bravery and resistance and expertise in who those people are, they also are not necessarily meaningfully incorporating community voices that are calling for a different vision for Myanmar, that of a more federal, inclusive Myanmar that brings the Rohingya back, that actually includes, the Rohingya as one of the recognized ethnic groups of the country, that supports the repatriation, that supports restitution of land, that looks at meaningfully at what peace with ethnic groups looks like. What does it look like for a federalized, set of states to have ownership over natural resources, hear the calls for justice and accountability meaningfully. And so that's the other thing I'd push the international community to do, is to think about how it is that in your work, in who you're engaging with, who the international community, chooses to put into these positions as we move forward, how is it that it's the voices like these that are helping to lead the way forward in that conversation? So those are my calls here today, and I'll turn it back over to Naomi.
Thank you so much for that, Akila. I think that's a perfect segue into some of the questions. I do want to just acknowledge, I do believe there was going to be an intervention from our colleague, the Minister Counselor from the UK mission to the UN. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chanaka Wickramasinghe. Thank you. Thank you very much for that intervention and for the continued support of those who are here in their communities. I'd like to open it up to questions from those who are here in the audience. I believe that there is a microphone. All right, thank you so much. Yes, yes.
So my name is Martin Gallagher. I'm the acting GPR at the Irish mission. So sitting with our UK colleagues on the Security Council at the moment. So, I mean, to start, just thanks so much for the initiative of putting together this discussion today. I mean, like, it's really inspiring to hear from civil society activists, and as Ambassador Ray said at the beginning, civil society is really playing a more and more important role in informing us as decision makers in terms of how we approach these issues. So it's no longer listening, as you said yourself, to maybe elite leaders who are telling us how we should handle things. We need to listen to actually grassroots and understand the complexities and the detail of what's going on underneath the surface. So I think events like this really help us to do that. I mean, you know, sort of, it's very frustrating really to come back to this issue 5 years down the line. I was around here in 2017 when, you know, the sort of Rohingya crisis, as it was called at the time, sort of emerged. But of course, it was a crisis long before it was sort of on the front pages. And, you know, one of the things that I think we need to do better in the Security Council and in the system as a whole is around prevention and responding to the signs of genocide, responding to the early warning signs, so that we're taking action before these things happen, before they hit the front pages, when often it's too late. I think, you know, the discussion today around accountability and justice, I mean, they're really, we can't accept impunity. And I hate using this term, there can be no impunity, because there is impunity. And how do we move from a situation where there is impunity to a situation where there's no impunity? And I mean, that's where we've, I think, all been struggling against vested interests, whether it's, you know, protectors or whatever along the way, but we have to continue all of those efforts, whether it's the IRM, whether it's the ICJ, you know, we just have to, within the Security Council, we just have to continue to push. And it's important for, I think we heard today, for a number of reasons, like, you know, accountability is important for justice, but it's also important to lay the foundations for sort of future equity. And, you know, we talk about return of the Rohingya. The return of the Rohingya can never happen unless there is accountability for what happened to that community. And that's something that we have to continue to work, and we have to continue to make sure that that's understood by others, that it's not just about drawing a line in the sand, it's actually about building a foundation for a future inclusive, diverse Myanmar, Burma, as you said. So, like, I mean, from our side, from the Irish side, you know, Yasmin, you said, don't forget the Rohingya. I think we do talk now about the, you know, the most recent, the coup, and there is a possibility of the Rohingya getting lost in that conversation, at least from our perspective. When we come to the table to talk about Myanmar, we never forget to talk about the Rohingya, and we'll continue to do that. You know, at the Security Council, our focus is on ending the violence. It's on, you know, trying to create a path for restoration of a democratic system in society, and around the impunity. And we'll continue to do that. We work with the UK and we work with other allies in the council. So thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Your comments made me think back to the work that many of us were doing after 2006 and Cyclone Nargis, and how that changed, unfortunately, a lot of the working methods of the Security Council on these types of issues. But also it really brought to the fore the challenges of, as you said, using the council for the purposes of prevention and for responding to early warning. One of the things that we talk a lot about as an institution is the importance of political courage, of empowering bureaucracies to essentially lean forward and to do the things that are needed to help ensure that when there is that historical reckoning that always happens, that we will have been on the right side of history, because we found the ways to ensure that the warnings were made, that we did everything in our effort and in our power to try to compel a response and action. And that in a world where, unfortunately, we don't see too much prevention, we see too little, that we were there in the aftermath to try to help communities rebuild. I think that also draws an important kind of element to the conversation today, which is accountability is one part of a much broader strategy that is needed. And I think there's a moment right now where we need to see a reassessment and recalibration of every government's position and policy as it comes to Burma or Myanmar writ large. From an atrocity prevention perspective, that includes also assessing risks throughout the country and really micro-targeting your strategies and responses, identifying which countries can take the lead in addressing the myriad of, unfortunately, very, very kind of dire situations that exist for a number of different communities, and exploring all of the tools. And that might also mean revisiting some of the kind of shared assumptions that we've made around the role of ASEAN and the 5 points. You know, there are many different, I think, strategies that need to be explored right now alongside the important efforts being undertaken in the accountability space, and the need to make sure that those are enduring commitments that will last decades because of just how difficult these cases are. And I think we also have to ground, when we talk about these cases, a recognition of how hard it is to actually effectively prosecute the crime of genocide, and in some cases, crimes against humanity, including persecution. So how do we work with communities to help them also understand that if there is not a successful genocide case or a successful persecution case before a court, that does not mean that it invalidates the experiences that they had. It is the reality of how difficult international criminal justice is. But we have to continue to take those efforts forward because of all of the different reasons that were said before, and because we know that the lack of any accountability thus far is what has empowered and compelled the military to be able to today be as audacious as they are, as to open fire on their own civilians, imprison people, and continue to make life simply impossible for people to be able to go forward, let alone to thrive or imagine themselves as part of a future Burma. So I think that this is also a moment to, when we talk about accountability, really recognize, and I was struck when Ambassador Ray mentioned the Ken Burns documentary on Americans in the Holocaust. At the end, it concludes with this comment from Eleanor Roosevelt, and she says that that she was essentially, her impression was that we let our conscience realize too late the enormity and the consequences, and that for her, the lesson that came from it was prevention. Well, we couldn't talk about Burma in the Security Council on the formal agenda. It was in any other business, in every other kind of creative way. So today, I appreciate the commitment that you just expressed to be as creative as possible to bring information before the Security Council, to bring diverse voices and find ways for civil society's voices to be at the fore of that and to ensure that it is representative, but that we're doing that in every fora that we have the fortune and the privilege to be seated, and to do that alongside our remarkable colleagues. I want to open up if there are any other questions from those who are here in the audience. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Ingrid. I work for the Norwegian Mission here in New York, covering Myanmar specifically. I also have a background in doing research on the Rohingya. So I went to Cox's Bazar in 2018, early on. So it's an issue that's close to my heart, and I've been following it. I've followed it closely for the past 5 years. Thank you so much to the panelists today. It's been, it's inspiring to listen to you and all your bravery in your work. It's of course we're in a situation that is very dark, but the bravery you guys are showing is just, it's incredible. Norway has been supporting, we've had long bilateral ties to Myanmar since 1956. And since the early 2010s, we've been working closely with civil society, with women organizations, and also a lot with peace and reconciliation efforts. And this is a priority for us that we will continue. Also, our seat at the Security Council now, we want to use, and we have used as much as we can to really push forward the plight of Rohingya, but also Myanmar in and of itself. And we will, of course, work together with our colleagues to find these innovative ways that we can really push for council action on this issue. And we fully support utilizing all international mechanisms when it comes to accountability, 100%, with the ICC, with the ICJ, with the IIMM. I just have one quick question. I won't take too much time to Jasmine. I know that the NUG they've approved they accepted the jurisdiction of the ICC. They've also given support to the ICJ and the Gambia case. And they have, to some degree, worked with the IIMM. But I was wondering, in terms of the Rohingya question to all of this, how do you guys work with them on accountability, and what are kind of the signals you've been getting? Because you talked a lot about inclusion and about being a part of discussions, and I mean accountability in these processes is so much linked to the Rohingya. So it'd be interesting to hear from you on that.
Thank you so much for that question. I'm sorry. I think that this is not going to take a turn to be any lighter of a topic, especially when we touch on the NUG. Unfortunately, as the time progresses, we are seeing more and more of the unwillingness from the NUG side to actually listen to what we have to say. And realistically, We understand that we've been we've basically been excluded so much that that's the default approach. So as much as the NUG is appearing to be more involved or more accepting of the Rohingya, we have to realize that Rohingya are not supposed to be asking for a place to be in this country. We already exist and we should not have to ask for our place, which is very much a rightful place for us. So I would like to plead, and this is actually perfect because I wanted to plead to the UN member states, because it's important to not legitimize the NUG unless they actually have a plan. And that plan should be extremely elaborate on what they plan to redress the issue of the Rohingya and how they plan to end impunity within their system. Because federalized constitution, wonderful. These are just wonderful things that actually come from the labor of activists, come from the labor of people who fight on the ground, who struggle to actually get their voices heard. All of these elites that that Akila was referring to are actually not in touch with what's happening on the ground, unfortunately. Even though some of them are, you know, very much civil society actors prior to this, unfortunately within the system that is unfortunately was basically inherited by the NLD. A lot of the NLD similar approach is still pervasive within the NUG. On top of that, like let me give one example. The various racist remarks that a few cabinet members have made are still not held accountable. And one of the cabinet member actually recently testified at the Canadian Senate Committee for Human Rights. And he said that he's apologetic, but he blamed the lack of information. He blamed his ignorance. There is no way that could be true. He has so much access to intelligence in the country, but he was willing to actually apologize only because it was convenient to use the Rohingya name for legitimacy of his own position. So every single time you engage with the NUG, I'm not saying to not work with them at all, because unfortunately we don't have a better choice. What I would ask is to take it with a grain of salt and continue to push for where Rohingya is, and why aren't Rohingya part of the cabinet members, or why aren't Rohingya taking up these positions? Because let's face it, accountability would have to include the most persecuted people in the process. Without that, how do you know that the process is flawed and not working? So ensuring that you ask those questions always. Where are the Rohingya? What are they doing? What have you done? What are the plans to actually envision the future for the Rohingya? How are the land restitution going to work? What's the reparation? Do we liquidate the military enterprise once this is all over? So there has to be more envisioning of the future that is realistic and practical when it comes to the NUG. They can't just go around and say that we're the legitimate government without actually having any plans at all, and act like business is as usual. Thank you.
Thank you, Yasmin, for that. And again, just underscoring the theme that's been throughout the conversation about the importance of sincere inclusivity, and for specifically looking for which voices are not being heard and how they can be put at the fore, and how we can support through creative means that happening. It's been
Naomi, can I draw Saoirse into this conversation really quickly? She and I were talking before at this panel about, not just the NUG, but the NUCC as the importance of the NUCC as a process that's setting forward a path for the country, and maybe where also you're seeing some of these same fissures. I think would be useful for people in this room to hear, Saoirse, what you were telling me.
Okay. So thank you so much for the float again. So since the NUCC started, so there will be was the one of the women's and that has invited the first women's group that has invited, and that in there there's a lot of groups involved, ethnic armed groups, some of ethnic armed groups, and then some of the elected representative of the parliaments that own the election in the 2013, and then also party representative, and that civil society groups cause as a resistance movement, and that we had a state-based, they call the state-based consultative council. So for example, Rakhine State consultative council, and the Mon State consultative council, and Chin Ever Chin, and the some of the state-based and some of the ethnic-based, like minority of the Ta'an. They also have a consultative council. So all those groups involved, and that since we try to advocate to engage more groups to involve in the NUCC platform before the People Assembly in the last January, we invite more women's groups to be part in there. So the other two women's groups from the Women Peace Network, we knew also once represented in the NUCC, and also Women Advocacy Coalition Myanmar. So be part in the represented in the NUCC. But it totally the numbers of the women are still small, and still lack of passionate. Actually, we agreed in the charter to have at least 30% women in the decision-making level. So in the principally in charter has agreed with many different groups. But in the action, we always have to push even the represent the NUCC, or even they spoke to the media, or even every action that we going to do, we always, as a women's group, always has to push. And that also to include more participation and representative with the different community class, like disabled and LGBT, and also Rohingya and a minority either. So these are also still pushing. Actually, the NUCC has a decision to have more engaging with the different groups to be in the NUCC platform. And that also the NUCC role is the policy guiding as a based on the political context to guide the NUG and even the CRPH as was. But in the practically, so they still slow and also not really active to action to guide the policy, and also to guide the NUG as well. So NUGs also have their own plan and their own strategy, and implement or take action, whatever. And also the other side, NUCC also slowly revise the policy and review and discuss the engagement, engage with most representatives. So still slow. So we have seen there's demonstration or protests post that NUCC are very slow, and that's because we have big challenge. We need to, how to say, build the trust, because we had like we have two sides. The side, most of the representatives who are basically stand for the democracy many long years, and then the other side, like ethnic revolution groups that stand for the federal democratic unions for a long time. And that within that, some of that like CRPH or NUG or NLD side, they don't have the same thought on the federal democratic union. So this is the big challenge that I have been experienced since I was involved in the beginning until now. So the mindset of the centralization also still, we have to intervene and debate. Even the charter has agreed as a better principle, but the practically still is a practice as a centralized, especially the CRPH and NLD and other groups that they have been experienced to hold the power or legitimacy in the past. So this time also they feel they also own the legitimacy. Actually we agree and support as well. But
they need to, how to say, recognize both legitimacy, that we try for de facto legitimacy and a de jure legitimacy. So this is the big challenge that we are in the UCC process. And the other part, so actually Burma context is not new. The only update and the only situation getting worse and worse. And that's also before the Rohingya crisis. And the ethnic people has suffered and faces all those crimes. So the only thing the international community need to seize the system come from beginning after the colonized, and then after the Burma having the independence. So and then start the military junta system till start there, and until today are the same. Uses the rape as a weapon and ongoing impunity, and also they allow to be commit any crimes. So just one thing, and the last thing that I would like to call and push the international community to do not let them and do not involve in the process or person to let them to be going impunity and also to do the crimes. So now there's nowhere and everyone can do the crimes because we don't have any court, any justice, and mechanism. So this is the we always concerned about the ground, even the cheaters under 80 so have been raped and without any accountability. And that's so what we are satisfied now. The whole country happened like conflict right now. So in the past, we mostly focused the conflict in the ethnic area, but now across the country happened the conflict, sexual violence or the conflict happened all the whole country. So this is what to deeply push or call for the international community to assist the survivor and assist the women's, even all the people in Burma are in the insecure and in the fear life. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Nasser, sir. And thank you just for, again, just underscoring just how urgent the situation is right now and the response that's required. I think it's really easy when we're talking about Burma and Myanmar to focus on all of the failures. But I think it's important to also end in this conversation with some of the bright lights. And I think the reality is we have to a degree seen, choose the term, Renaissance revolution of justice efforts in this particular context. Thank you, Bob. Yes. Thank you, Bob.
All of you for coming. I want to thank our panelists for such a compelling discussion. And as I often do, I want to just end with a bit of a story. When I first went to Myanmar, it was not because of the Rohingya crisis. It was because I was the founding chairman of an organization called the Forum of Federations, which is still very much alive and in existence as an organization that brings the federal perspective into looking at how countries govern themselves. And I learned in my first visit to Myanmar that the very expression, which was the foundational slogan of the colonial struggle, contained within it a profound ambiguity. And that is the expression Burma for the Burmese. So what does the phrase Burma for the Burmese mean? Well, you can certainly see it as a nationalist expression opposed to imperial rule. So yes, but I learned from so many ethnic leaders in Burma that they considered the phrase to mean weaponizing the power of the Bamar against them, as opposed to a rallying cry which would bring people together. The last point I want to make is that when we talk about coming to terms with the past, I think every single country that has engaged with Myanmar from the beginning of its independence has to look inside itself and say, what did we do and what did we fail to do? What did we try to do and what did we fail to recognize was a critical issue? And I think you'll see every step along the way, mistakes were made. Not necessarily out of evil, but because people are human and make mistakes and make priorities and say, this is more important than that. We need to focus on this question before we focus on that question. And I would say that to me, it was a fundamental lesson of my next engagement, which was on the Rohingya issue, which is to say, those of us who felt that, well, we'll deal with the Rohingya issue once we dealt with the other issues. That was a mistake. And we can point out the ways along steps along the way that it was a mistake. And so I think it's for me, it's now a foundational question, is the nature of the treatment of every minority, including the Rohingya, has to be the foundational question of the discussion. And there can be no compromise on that because we compromised on that before and it was a mistake. And we need to recognize that. So with that, I want to thank everybody. Naomi, it's been great working with you again. And until next time, I can assure you, we will be at this for a while. So this is an important conversation. Thank you very much. And thanks especially to our panelists who are just terrific. Thank you.